I want to continue with two new friends of mine. The shift in the conversation is talking to a brother who created a program called Motivational Consulting. And Motivational Consulting is a program that provides services to treatment programs in the Twin Cities. I don't know if you want to come around here to this side. Is he okay there? We're getting our webcast set up so that we can have the best video too. Obviously, reminding you that we are streaming live to Facebook, and we're pleased to do that with you. And so, let's see. Artiste Mayfield introduced me to an artiste is here in studio with artiste. How you doing? Let me turn my microphone on to my next guest, brother George Lewis. George Lewis is the principal and director of Motivational Consulting, and I invited artiste and brother George to come by and talk about the work that they're doing in the community. Brother George, how you doing, man?
Doing very well, Alan. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you for being here. We had an introductory conversation last week, and you kind of explained the concepts of your work. Mm-hmm. And I said, you know what, let's have this conversation on the air, and that's why we're here today. Yeah. So I'm going to ask you to open up by talking about what is Motivational Consulting Inc., and what you do, what are you providing, what are you bringing to the community, and what got you there? Why did you start this work?
Well, actually, from my own history, I'm a person in long-term recovery myself, and I started working in the field of substance use disorder back in 1997, working with African American Family Services at that time. And I did a couple of programs, one of which was the domestic violence program. The director of African American Family Services at the time was a lady by the name of Salima Majid. And Salima had given me a lot of mentorship throughout the time I spent at African American Family Services. Well, when she passed away, the dynamics of African American Family Services changed. I left African American Family Services, I think it was the year 2000, and I started doing lectures. I was given the opportunity to do lectures at treatment centers. And what began to happen is I started getting more and more requests to work with these treatment programs doing lectures. And over the years, it grew. And then 2012, I decided, well, this was no longer something I could do by myself and not enough of me. So I started looking for other people to work with me. And in 2012, I formed Motivational Consulting Incorporated. And what we do is, basically our mission is to provide motivational lectures and group facilitation services that offer training and informational products focused on helping therapeutic professional clients of different ethnic, cultural, and social groups. One of the big problems that I noticed in the field of substance use disorder and treatment is that we have great counselors. I mean, they're great, but the majority of them are white. The population of people of color that are beginning to enter these treatment programs are obviously people of color, and they are finding good services, but it could be better. The problem being most don't look like the people they're serving. And obviously you can't determine that. The fact is that's just the way it is in the state of Minnesota. But what I found that we could do was help those professionals communicate better with. So that's what motivational consulting tries to do through the materials that it has produced. I wrote a curriculum called Bami Soro. in the Yoruba language, simply meaning talk to me. And it provides a number of topics that allow a professional to basically break the ice, begin to bridge the gap of communications. We have some talented people working. Their hearts are in the right place, but just like all of us, we come from a system of education that doesn't teach us how to communicate with each other. And so
it doesn't teach us to value each other.
Absolutely.
And that's as big a problem, I think.
And hopefully that's part of what motivational consulting does address, because in doing so, we allow the professional to begin to understand a little bit more about the people they're working with, and we get the information that they have that's very important to the person that they're trying to the audience that they're trying to serve. And so much of what motivational consulting do, in addition to providing lecture services, is that we help to provide services around presentations with professionals, helping them to go to develop skills that work with people of color. We actually have we're going to be starting a new program actually in January, and it's called Cultural and Racial Sensitivity. And the purpose behind that is that many of the professionals, over a 2-year period, they have to renew their licensing. Part of that of renewal is developing a certain number of CEUs over the 2-year period. In that, I think it's 9, I'm not positive, but I think it's about 9 of those CEUs have to be in the field of cultural and racial diversity. And so what we've developed is a program that we're beginning to do, and we're going to kind of unveil in January. Is called Cultural and Racial Sensitivity Presentations. And what we'll do is work with professionals in the field of mental health, therapy, substance use disorder, and we'll work with them to help them develop skills to work with people of color.
So I think what you're doing, Brother George Lewis, is wonderful, and it's also subversive. So let me explain what I mean by that.
Sure.
Subversive in this way, it seems like the model that existed in mental health and in care in general was based on a standard that fit Europeans, their experience, their knowledge of themselves, and they used that template as a template for all other people. So there was not a recognition of the nuance of culture and ethnicity, but rather when you provided mental health or psychological or social services to an individual, you were doing that in the context of making them whole, and the model for wholeness was Ozzie and Harriet. You know, or what are those 1950?
Father knows best.
Father knows best.
Right.
So that was the model, right?
Yeah.
But that really didn't include us, and it didn't reflect our experience as Africans in the New World.
Absolutely.
As African Americans, and it probably doesn't include, the Latino and the Asian, except for that. On the one level, we all are human, and all of us have the same basic motivations and drives to be decent human beings. But culture is a way of training, and the culture that is being presented as the formal official culture of America and of white people may not serve the interests of black people. I say that to say that as often as not, being black was perceived as a deficit, and black culture, black people, therefore, looked at negatively. And so when you have decided that there's a problem with good-intentioned white people wanting to provide genuine quality of life improvements for people that they are serving, but not having the tools to do so, then you come to the table with a product that brings these tools that helps them navigate the cultural bridges, the pathways that, in effect, teach them to respect what they've been taught to ignore.
Right.
To understand and appreciate and to value which of things that they thought had no value, no meaning, and no consequence, because the culture itself diminished and devalued black life and black existence. So you begin to train white people intentionally on pathways, strategies, language, views of embracing the quintessential humanity of people that they have chosen in the past to not see as human, and they embrace it, they love it. I call that subversive, because they now can look at and be critical at the oppressive nature of white supremacy and white culture. So the challenge is not only to provide services to these individuals in our communities and cultures who need support and help, but it's also to address the systems that oppress us, right? And that addressing has to at least be part of the work of allies, of white people who will examine and be critical at the analyses of the destruction that white supremacy has wrought on black people and on the world. What do you think?
Okay, that was a lot.
That was a lot.
That's a lot. But first of all, I don't think the Ozzie and Harriet model worked for them either.
Okay.
It did not work for them either.
There you go.
But to address the points that you've been making, as many of them as I can remember as we were talking, is that at some point somebody has to start somewhere, and I'm looking at, and I wish I could solve the whole problem, but I'm not capable of solving the whole problem. So the area that I see is the area in the substance use area of society. I see the devastation that substance abuse and substance use disorder has wreaked on our communities. And I see it on an individual level, not the statistical level where there's so many numbers involved in it. I see the people who are actually suffering from this. And I see them going in and out of treatment centers more constantly. It's almost like revolving. They're going in and they're coming out and they're coming back again. So in my mind, what's the problem? The information is there. It's not that the information is not there, but I don't think the information is being delivered in a way that that the people who are receiving it can actually assimilate it to their life and take advantage of it to their best interests. And that is not necessarily the fault of the providers. It's the system, and you're right.
It's the culture.
It's the culture. It's the way it is. I mean, when we talked earlier, I mentioned to you that from the point that you go to kindergarten to the time that you get a PhD, you're getting all of those credentials based on the perspective of whites, and that's not how people of color see the world. And the perspective of whites has to be learned by people of color in order to get their accreditations so that they can themselves begin to even help their own people. So what I'm trying to do is say, well, look, I wish that there were enough black counselors, therapists, mental health providers. I wish there were enough of them that anytime a black person sits down and needs those services, they actually see someone who looks like them. That's not going to be doable, at least not yet. And so since that's not doable, from my point of view, seeing what I see on a daily basis, I thought the best thing that I could do was, with what I know and what I see on a daily basis, is to help those professionals that are delivering these services bridge that gap to the best that they could do. And I provided the information, and it's still not as thorough as I would like it to be. I still have some best practice research to do, but it won't happen until I get this into the fields. So we've started doing some of this. We've gotten some pretty good reviews so far. And what I'm looking for now is to just begin this process. Trust me, I'm never satisfied. So even though, like you said, it may seem subversive, but where do you start? So one can only start in the area that they're most familiar with. This was the area I'm familiar with, so this is the area I selected. And so far, it seems to be doing well enough for me to continue.
I'm Al McFarland. This is Conversations with Al McFarland. My guest is George Lewis. George Lewis is the principal at Motivational Consulting Inc. They provide lecture services to treatment programs throughout Twin Cities and Twin Cities suburbs. And they have created a system of 10 lectures, right?
Yeah, 10 workbooks.
Workbooks.
Yes.
That people can use. The workbooks are under the title Barney Sorrow.
That's correct.
Right. And the idea is to create a document or a series of documents that can help bridge the communications gap between white counselors, therapists, and mental health providers and their black clients.
Correct.
So create solutions and pathways to solutions. You say your mission statement is to offer training and informational products that are focused on helping therapeutic professionals understand and assist clients of different ethnic, cultural, and social groups. What is the resistance to that? Is there resistance to it? And I'm operating on the thought that quite often when our people bring solutions to the marketplace, we are resisted. I've said it this way. We get the misery, they get the money.
Right.
They make money on our misery, and if we say, you know what, you can't make money on us anymore, that we're going to solve problems in our community, we get resistance. It might not be true in your case, but let me ask that question of you.
Yeah, and that's a good question because actually, so far, I've not gotten any real resistance, and I say that, cautiously, yet. What my expectations are is that because there's very little out there that's doing this, that it's being received pretty well right now. As a matter of fact, we've even begun to get some recognition outside the state of Minnesota. We're now looking to see what we can do in another state. What we've begun to do so far is, and I think it's only a natural progression, is the cultural and racial sensitivity presentations, because those speak directly doing actual presentation workshops with professionals in the room. The Bami Suro series is really given to counselors mostly to facilitate groups that have blacks in it. And I'm understanding now that education is starting to take a look at this. One of the things that was amazing to me, I went to a school, a local school, and about a year or so ago, and I did this presentation for teachers, and they were teaching kids from junior high to high school. And while I was doing this, I had a chance to speak with some of the history teachers, and history is something I like. It's just my passion. But when we were talking, I asked a question, and the question I asked was, if I were to take away Barack Obama, Frederick Douglass, Martin Luther King, if I were to take away those people, who else would you consider a black hero? And I was surprised because there was no real response to that question. So what that told me really at that moment was these learned people, they were also victims of their own social society, their own social group. They didn't have to learn about us, so they didn't. Yet they get the dollars and they get the credentials to teach us. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and so what I now find is that, at least I feel from my point of view, is that if we want these kinds of things, why don't we start doing it ourselves? And this was my answer to that question so far.
I like that. Let me bring our friend Artiste Mayfield. Artiste, you introduced me to Brother George Lewis, and I met you, Artiste, when you were organizing some political work for North Minneapolis during the last election. First of all, thank you for being here. Thank you for what you have been doing as a community organizer, and thank you for connecting me with Brother George Lewis. As you hear this discussion, what is going on in your mind? What are you thinking?
Well, what comes to my mind is I do get the teaching part, but yeah, I get the teaching part that he's wanting to teach people how to get along in the workplace. At the same time, I still think that my thoughts would be, too, at the same time, is they should know how to get along with us. They sometimes just don't want to get along with us. And then on the flip side of that, too, is...
Come into the microphone, yeah.
On the flip side of that, too, is that he's coming with a different strategy. And maybe it will change people's lives, or we can see if the stats go up or down. You know, if they do become a part of it, if they do act on what he's teaching them, is it going to grow? Are we going to see change? And so somebody has to do the work. Somebody has to pick that job to do. So here, George, there you go. So let's see how this all plays out. But also, I see people learning things about us that maybe they shouldn't know. Or
they should not know, or they should know already, you mean?
They should know already.
Right.
But then, you can flip that too and say that that's how, okay, we'll go with Donald Goins. He began to write those books, and that's how the white man began to learn about who we are and what we did and how we did it. And that's how he did. But I think George is coming from a different perspective with it, because when you go into a workplace and they're treating me lower than they're treating the Caucasian, then that's a problem. So to step in their face and say, I see the problem and I'm here to change this problem. So I can see where he's coming from about changing the problem. And I hope everything works, because he's really good at what he do. I've watched him, otherwise I wouldn't have made the connection, right? But just like you was just threw out there, I see some things that white people, but Caucasians, white people, other people, they look to get something rise about African American people. They need to add on something every day, But if the different route that he's going, I'm pretty good with it, knowing that George is going to go a different route and present it in a different way, and hope that the outcome comes out 100%.
Well, so George, here's what I think. I think that, and the reason I call this subversive is not in a negative way, but in a truthful way. There is a need to subvert, to ultimately dismantle and destroy white supremacist thought.
Right.
Brother Haile Selassie said, until the color of a man's skin is of no more significance than the color of his eyes, there's going to be a big problem.
Right.
And that's a problem that we don't initiate, but we suffer from. And so our fight has to be to dismantle the thinking that makes it more important to be white, and to conflate white with being right. To challenge that, to dismantle it. And so when you begin to actually provide knowledge, understanding, insight, so that people that are genuine, who want to serve people, individuals that are going through development challenges, who have been broken but want to move towards wholeness again. And there are those in our community who provide that service. That's wonderful. But there are others that want to have that training and that professional capacity too. When you provide them with a way to understand differently, and to understand not from the perspective of the exclusivity of white privilege.
White privilege.
White privilege, but with an understanding of shared global universal humanity, decency, dignity. That is subversive because that's not what their system does right now. And so I think that the mission is not only to heal us, but in the healing of us and when we are engaged at directing our own healing, and that healing also means we have to go upstream and change the things that create the sickness.
Absolutely.
And that's replace this tape with another tape, shift the narrative, right?
Correct.
So that there's a different understanding globally. I think we're doing what we're supposed to do, and we're on the path we're supposed to be on.
Right.
We don't only heal ourselves, but we heal that which makes us sick.
Yes.
And if we can heal that, then we won't be sick again.
Absolutely.
That's what I think.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, a matter of fact, I think primarily this whole endeavor is to do both. When I started, actually, to be quite frank with you, when I started with the hopes of helping my people, black people. But the further I went down this route, I started to realize this also has the capability of healing whites. And when I say that, they're victims of a system that they don't realize they're a victim of. And I say that not just looking at their part of it because they're the dominant culture here, but mainly because they don't even know that they need to know this. They're just beginning to have some sort of inclination that they're missing something. And this was my attempt to say, this could be what you're missing. Take a look. And because one of the things, too, as you talked about hoping that there'll be a time when the significance of the color of a man's skin or woman's skin all along. We've had this there's always this talk about having this particular conversation, and the conversation is either co-opted or never had in earnest. And I think it's time now that from all perspectives, whether it's politics or whether it's business, or that we begin to have this conversation in all areas of American society, because we're here and we're part of this country and we help build this country.
There we go.
You know, so I take ownership of my share of it. I don't give it up to anyone because we all did our part to build this too.
I'm Al McFarland. This is Conversations with Al McFarland.